The world holds the breath. Russia has been preparing for one of the most decisive moments since the beginning of the war against Ukraine. An offensive of spring and summer that can completely change the direction of this invasion. It's not just another advance, it's not just another strategic movement. It is a clear attempt to turn the game, to impose a victory before the window of opportunity is close for good. Putin sees this offensive as decisive. Kremlin knows that time is playing against. The economy bleeds, internal morale balances and international pressures increase. Therefore, the plan is ambitious and, at the same time, desperate. Behind the scenes, Moscow accelerates all preparations. More air operations, new battle fronts, and a redoubled effort to strengthen offensive capacity. The main focus? The Donbass region, especially Donetsk. This area has become a military obsession for Russia. Taking full control of Donetsk is seen as a political trophy, a way of presenting to the world and the Russian people some kind of palpable victory. But behind these strategic movements, there is a reality that Kremlin tries to hide at any cost. Russia even managed to increase its combat forces. Today there are about 620,000 mobilized soldiers, thanks to forced enlistment campaigns, financial incentives, and, of course, fear. When the salary does not convince, fear solves. But even with this impressive number of soldiers on paper, in practice, breaking the Ukrainian defense lines has proven to be an almost impossible mission. The Ukrainian army, with the support of the West, has fortified, created deep, resistance layers of defense, and is increasingly prepared for what's coming. And there is more. This war is no longer just a confrontation between field soldiers. Today, technology dictates the rules. Ukraine dominates the drone war, blocks advances and destroys armored even before they reach the front line. The numbers do not lie. The amount of Russian tanks destroyed in recent months is scary. Each breakthrough costs expensive. Each meter won comes with a price of blood and equipment that Russia is already having difficulty replacing. But Russia insists. And with this new offensive, Putin's plan, of course, to advance it costs what it costs. Before the time, the money and patience of the Russian people run out. Behind the propaganda curtain, reality is different. The government spends fortunes on war, while the population begins to feel the effects on the skin. Lack of investment in health, education, infrastructure. But Kremlin bets on all this offensive. Because if it fails, the consequences can be catastrophic not only for troops on the front, but also for Putin's own political future. The tension increases every day. The troops move, the tanks advance, the planes cut the heavens. But the big question continues in the air. Will this offensive be enough to change the course of war? Or is it just another bloody chapter of an invasion that has been too much for both sides? In the next few minutes, we will dive even deeper into this reality. Let's talk about the devastating economic costs of this war for Russia. Losses, debts, and direct impact on the daily life of the population. Because while soldiers march to the front, the silent battle that happens within Russia itself can be even more dangerous to Kremlin than any Ukrainian advance. The Russian economy is paying a very high price for this war. The military budget, which previously represented an important share of government accounts, now consumes about 40% of all public spending. Almost half of all available money is being burned to support the war effort. And this has a direct and cruel cost. Cuts in essential areas such as health, education, infrastructure, and social programs. Schools with less resources, hospitals without equipment, abandoned roads. All to finance tanks, missiles, and soldiers in a war that seems more and more a background. But the impact goes beyond government accounts. Inflation in Russia is rising at a worrying pace. Basic products such as food and fuels are increasingly expensive. Supermarket shelves show the new reality of a country at war. Less variety, higher prices, and a population starting to feel the weight of choices made by their leaders on the skin. The devalued ruble makes it imports essential goods even more difficult, creating a backbidding cycle of crisis. And dissatisfaction begins to grow. The first manifestations are silent, discreet. Complaints in the lines of the markets, protests veiled on social networks. But Kremlin knows that a spark is enough for the scenario to change. Therefore, internal repression has also increased. Opponent arrests, censorship, independent news block, all to maintain control of the narrative and prevent the people from questioning too much. Meanwhile, in the front lines, Russia faces another critical problem: the quality of the troops. The rush to recruit soldiers increased the number of men in the ranks, but drastically reduced the level of preparation. Many of the new recruits have very little training. They are young people in a hurry to the front, with dubious quality equipment and almost no experience in real combat. The result? High-low rates, failed missions, and a direct impact on the operational capacity of Russian units. The morale of troops also suffers. Reports of desertions, soldiers refusing orders, and whole units retreating without authorization begin to emerge more often. Physical and psychological wear, added to the lack of basic field resources, creates an environment of constant tension in Russian rows. In addition, the evolution of the drone war has completely redefined how the fighting happens. The superiority that Russia had with its armor and heavy vehicles is now constantly annulled by the Ukrainian capacity to attack at a distance. The drones turned the battlefield into a real hell for the Moscow troops. Russian tanks, which previously advanced with confidence, are now easy targets for accurate attacks by unmanned aircraft. To try to balance this new reality, Russia has invested heavily in developing its own drone technologies. And in fact, there were advances. New models of kamikazes and recognition drones have begun to be used in recent weeks. But even with this technological evolution, Russia still faces limitations. Ukraine, with the help of allies such as the United States and European countries, has been significantly improving their aerial defenses and electronic war systems. The cat and rat game between drones and anti-drug defenses continues. And the logistical problem only gets worse. The rate of loss of tanks and armored vehicles by Russia is simply unsustainable in the long run. Even with large stocks of Soviet equipment, replacement capacity is increasingly compromised. The Russian war industry tries to accelerate production, but faces lack of components, international sanctions, and a technical bottleneck that limits the replacement at the speed needed to maintain the pace of offensive operations. The scenario that is designed is that of an offensive that advances slowly, at a very high cost, both in human lives and material and political resources. The cycle is cruel. To move forward, Russia needs more equipment and more soldiers. But each breakthrough results in more losses, demanding even more resources that the country no longer has. Behind the scenes, military analysts from around the world observe carefully. They know that if this offensive fails, the consequences can be devastating to Kremlin. Not just on the battlefield, but within Russia itself, where social and economic pressure grows as a time bomb about to explode. And all this happens as Ukraine prepares to resist. The next few weeks will be crucial. If Kiev can hold the line, if the Ukrainian defenses resist the impact of this offensive, the political and military scenario can start to turn against Moscow definitively. The war in Ukraine is not just a distant military confrontation for the Russians. It is a growing weight that begins to reflect on its demography, economy, and the country's own social fabric. The mass mobilization that expanded the army to about 620,000 soldiers brought a huge human cost. Thousands of young people, many of them little prepared, were sent to the front and did not return. This has a direct impact on the active population, the family structure, and the future of the country. Russia is now facing a serious demographic problem, with low birth rates and a quickly growing population while losing a generation of young men to war. In addition, economic wear and tear increases the risk of popular dissatisfaction. Increasing inflation and the scarcity of basic products force Russian families to adapt to a life of deprivation, while cuts in the public budget affect essential services. State propaganda tries to minimize these effects by painting a picture of resistance and patriotism, but this narrative loses strength in the face of the reality lived on the streets and houses. The effects of war are also felt in internal morale. The strict censorship and the repression of opponents try to stifle criticism, but fear does not erase discontent. Confidence in government begins to falter, especially among younger generations, who see in conflict a source of suffering and loss without a clear prospect of victory. In the battlefield, despite the difficulties, Russia seeks to maintain its offensive, betting on guerrilla tactics and small units to compensate for the loss of armored and Ukrainian rule in the drone war. Reduced mobility and Kiev's technological superiority force Russians to constantly reinvent themselves. But this does not eliminate the chronic problem of the lack of trained equipment and soldiers. For Moscow, the spring-summer offensive is a risky and high-cost move. If successful, you can guarantee an important territorial advance and strengthen Kremlin's position both internally and externally. But if it fails, it may be the beginning of irreversible wear. Ukrainian resistance grows with increasing international support, while Russian economy and society show clear signs of wear. The fate of this offensive goes beyond the battlefield. He can define Putin's political future and Russia's stability for years. The possibility of Kiev-favorable peace negotiations depends directly on the Ukrainian capacity to resist and inflict significant losses to Russian forces. In a scenario where the human, economic, and political cost of war continues to rise, the issue is not only who will gain control of Donetsk or Donbass, but who will endure the weight of this war until the end. Russia faces a dilemma today: to persist in a risky offensive, which can cost even more expensive, or accept that the war has already changed the country forever. The world observes attentive. Spring and summer approaching will not only be stations of the year, it will be the stage where the next chapter of this tragedy that changed Europe and the world will be decided.